Chelsea Dowell. I am a professor at Upper Iowa University, and I am going to be talking about globalizing the classroom. So we live in a global economy. We work in a global economy. So to best prepare our students, shouldn't we teach in a global classroom? So then what does a global classroom even look like? What does it mean to globalize a classroom? So I started asking myself these questions, and I did so in reaction to a trend I was finding in my Principles of Macroeconomics classes. I am my school is in a rural area. Many of my students come from rural areas. They come to college to learn how to run their family farms. And so many of them have no frame of reference for so many of these global topics that we're trying to get them to understand. And it makes it a lot harder to get engagement from students when they just have no frame of reference. I can give them as many real-world examples as I want, but if they can't make it personal to themselves, it's really hard for them to engage and interact with the material. So to try and figure out how I was going to develop these global learning opportunities for my students, it'd be all well and good if we could send them all to study abroad and really afford to get them all that really intense cultural experience. But I don't know about you, but that's not in my budget to send them all abroad. So instead, I said, okay, well, let me think about who my students really are, right? What sorts of characteristics do my students have? How can I best give them a global experience while still being in the classroom? So most of our students are traditional age, right? Most of our students are from the millennial generation. They tend to look like this, sometimes even in class, right? They're digital natives. They're very comfortable with technology, right? Very comfortable with technology. They even prefer a lot of electronic interaction. So I know it's not for every professor. It's not in their wheelhouse. Some it doesn't work in their structure. But I like to include their technology in my class. If you're going to be on your phone anyway, then I want you to be on your phone for economics. Right? If you're going to be on your laptop, I want you to be on your laptop for economics. So I actually try and include technology in many different ways. I'm going to show you some examples today in how I really try and open up my classroom to the world. My millennial generation, bless their souls, they really like group work. They love group collaboration. They like working with other people. Right? They very much like to be self-directed. They want to take charge of their learning opportunities, but they want to do it in a very structured environment, right? They want very clear goals. Please do this, 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 and this. Check the boxes. But they want to be the ones to do it. They don't want to just be shown how to do it. So I took all of these characteristics, the digital native, the group collaboration, and the self-directed studies, and I realized that live video streaming offers an excellent option to give global opportunities to our students. There are many different technologies out there that can allow this. Specifically, Skype and Zoom are more teleconferencing options, so I think most of us are fairly familiar with Skype. Right? You can get the picture of the person you're talking to up on the screen, and you talk to them, and they can talk directly back to you. Zoom is very similar. It's more often used in the industry setting. It's more often used in business for teleconferencing meetings, mostly because it has several options that meetings tend to enjoy or be more susceptible to for things like sharing documents. So if I have something on my screen, like an Excel sheet, I can share that with the other person. But it has many different options that make it a little bit more attractive to our businesses. As a part of the business school, we went forward, and the university has started creating what we call Zoom rooms. A Zoom room isn't necessary to do this. Zoom you can download for free, right? Just like you could Skype. Once you sign up, you have an account. You go and send a meeting to somebody else. They can set up their account, and you can teleconference with them. In a global classroom, it can be very expensive to bring in international speakers. I know it's not in my school's budget. Maybe it's in yours, and that's excellent. Congratulations. You can talk to me after the meeting. No, I'm just kidding. I love my school. But it's really an amazing option to have Zoom, because with Zoom, I don't have to pay for flights and bring them in. I don't have to pay for hotel rooms and travel. Instead, I can have my students sitting in their structured classroom, directly collaborating with my speakers. And there's a lot of control there. I know who the speaker's going to be. I know when we're going to meet. And I know generally what we're going to talk about. I send things to the speakers ahead of time. We base what their topic's going to be on where we are roundabouts in the chapters. Right? I make my students prepare questions ahead of time, so I know for sure that there's going to be some question and answer, some direct interaction with the speakers. In my international trade class, I'm setting up a series where I have 3 different speakers, all from Nicaragua. And they're all from different backgrounds within that country. So I've been in communication with an ambassador, I've been in communication with a doctor, and I've been in communication with some farmers that are taking local classes. So very diverse backgrounds within a country. And this way, my international trade students can interact with people from the same country at different points in the semester, but still start to see a bigger picture. Okay, this is what this country really looks like. These are some of the similarities they're having. These are some of the differences. These are why maybe theory doesn't always work out the way we think it might, right? There's institutions in place that are different. There's cultural norms here that we wouldn't have expected otherwise. So it helps to give them a cultural experience, a global experience from my classroom. Now, the others that you see up here are not necessarily teleconferencing options. They're live streaming options. So it tends to be a little bit more one way. I live stream to an audience, right? But the audience just passively watches, except for Periscope. The others have some options with them, but Periscope is actually the most popular of these options that I've placed up on the screen. So Facebook Live, Meerkat, Periscope, Ustream. Periscope has the largest network. So you have the biggest option of people broadcasting out to the world from all over the world. As long as you have a phone with a camera, you can, right, they say, tap a button and show us your world. It's that simple. So you have broadcasters and you have viewers. Right? Broadcasters and viewers. With Periscope, the viewers are able to interact with the broadcasters. They go in and they can actually text or they can type, depending upon what their device they're using, right? And they can send a comment. They can send a question. And then the broadcaster gets a list of questions from all of their viewers and can then verbally respond to them in their live stream. So there is interaction there. It's not as quite as in-depth as a teleconference face-to-face. But if you're interacting with strangers around the world, it adds a little bit of privacy, especially for students who don't necessarily want to show their face to random strangers across the globe. And I like to use Periscope in a couple of different ways. I have a paper co-authored with Daniel Duncan where we present 2 different assignments related to GDP and getting students to use Periscope in a Principles of Macroeconomics classroom. I'll present one of those assignments, but if you'd like to see more, they are in this paper. Now, Periscope in particular, because you're dealing with strangers, right? There's a level of unpredictability that you don't necessarily have with a teleconference where I've chosen a speaker, I've picked them out ahead of time, we've sort of vetted any potential issues before they come in and talk to my students. When you're talking to a random stranger across the globe, you might have some things pop up. What's nice is the unpredictability often adds to the engagement level for my students. They find things humorous and funny because stuff is going to happen. I warn my students ahead of time, you guys are adults. The broadcasters you might choose aren't always going to be G-rated. Please be respectful. Use your best judgment. If it makes you uncomfortable to hear maybe some of the language that a person is using, choose a different broadcaster. It's no harm. Most of them find it funny if every now and again a broadcaster has a curse word that comes out, because at heart they're still little kids and they kind of giggle, but they still talk about this. So I implemented the assignment I'm about to show you last semester, so in the spring, and I have a class that meets right after my principal's micro class this semester, and after class they still talk to me about it. I find that pretty amazing that you're still talking about an econ concept well after class. When I introduced Periscope, most of my students actually had not used Periscope yet. It was that new to them. Most had a Twitter account, and so Twitter is sort of your login for Periscope because Twitter owns Periscope. That's how it gets most of its network. But they were excited to download Periscope ahead of time because they thought it was really interesting that the old professor in the front of the room knew about an app that they didn't know about. I was pretty impressed. I kind of acted like I knew exactly what was going on. Kind of got my props in, but it didn't last long. They see through me sometimes. So for my actual assignment, I usually put my students in groups of 4, but I also have a small class size. I'm at a small teaching school. My co-author teaches at a larger university. He has larger class sizes, so if you look up his assignment, it's based on a larger setting. Right? So when I discuss things, keep in mind that these are very easy to change the characteristics to match whatever is going to be best for your classroom. But I make them get into groups of 4, and in the groups of 4, then I make each of the students pick a country. Right? I make each one pick a country, so each group has 4 countries that they're going to be looking at. Of those countries, I usually encourage my students not to choose the U.S. because they already have some experiences with the U.S., and so I want them to use whatever they see, this new information, and reference that back to their personal experiences. You do run into the issue that not everybody on Periscope speaks English, so I encourage them to pick a country that you know that you will be able to understand whatever the broadcaster is saying. That being said, I put them in groups of 4, and I am fortunate enough that our program has such a strong international contingent. I can usually put 1 international student per group together, so I know for sure that at least 1 student does actually speak another language. They are bilingual. But then I also have some students who are taking Spanish or taking German, and they just want to try it out to see if they're good enough. So that's fine by me. With their 4 countries, then, they have to brainstorm before they're allowed to broadcast. They have to brainstorm 3 questions. Each group can pick different questions, but within your group, you have to use the same 3. They pick questions that are supposed to help them decipher what is the real GDP in this country. By looking at their standard of living, their quality of life, they get to view people in their day-to-day activities live, unfiltered. See what's going on in the background. Are they driving in a car? Are they walking around? What are they wearing? Are they at a restaurant? What type of restaurant? What things are there? So a lot of it is observation, but then these 3 questions can take it a step further. And so they're supposed to discuss what questions are going to be best to help me figure out what is this country's standard of living. Now, students don't always come up with the best questions to start off with. My colleague had a large class discussion when a student offered up, why don't we ask them if they own a boat? So it led to a really great classroom discussion about, is that really going to help us understand the average standard of living in this country? Or is every broadcaster you're going to ask say no and you got no information? So the good news is most of the class kind of stepped up and said, no, wait. This is why we think that we should switch questions. And so they discussed it. They figured out what would be best. And so it ended up being a really great learning opportunity. I use that time to walk around with my groups and kind of help facilitate discussions. You do have this stray group or two that think they're kind of pulling one over on you, and they say, I know what I'm going to ask them. I'm going to ask the broadcaster what their GDP is. It usually backfires because the average person doesn't know what their country's GDP is. So they usually actually don't get any illuminating information. So I kind of let it go. But for the most part, they come up with really great questions. In the paper, we cite another source that gives lists of questions to talk about wealth and asset accumulation to help give the professor some ideas about what questions might be useful. Once they have their 3 questions, they ask those broadcasters their 3 questions. They write down their answers. They kind of get an idea of what is life like in this country from this person's point of view. Then they have to rank the GDPs of whichever countries they chose. Tell me which one you think is higher and lower. Put it in a relative order for me. What's really interesting is then this spurs another discussion. Real versus nominal. Per capita, right? Understanding those differences. And they have to try and figure out what resources are they going to use eventually, because they know what's coming next. They actually have to find the correct answer, right? But also, what order are we going to put them in? Is per capita the best way to analyze this? So then, they do have to look things up afterwards. They have to use a reputable source. No, Wikipedia does not count in my class. They usually, again, use their phones. They're already out. They're using Periscope. So they look things up. A lot of them end up going to either a country-specific website. Past that, I'm not very strict about what I consider a reputable source. It's mostly don't just wait and see whatever Siri pops up. Don't just ask Siri. They like to do that also. You actually have to go to maybe a government website or something a little bit more official. What's very interesting is that they come back and they say, oh my gosh, I was so far off. They can't believe that they weren't even close. And so then that adds another level of memory retention, because they leave and they don't forget how wrong they were, especially my students, my international students, who picked their home country and were very, very off. And they're so surprised by that, and they want to talk to you about that. So then we get to go into things about, well, is it because of some of the questions you asked? Are there better questions you could have asked? Or is it maybe because GDP is an imperfect measure of quality of life? And we get a whole new discussion. And so we're able to interact with this concept of GDP, but we're doing it from a global perspective. They're getting real-world experience around the globe. They're actually making these things personal. So yes, you end up with the stray broadcaster or two who just wants to sing pop songs in the mirror. That happens. They also find it funny, and we'll talk about it later, so I don't necessarily mind. They switch broadcasters to find somebody who's willing to talk to them. Most are willing to talk to them. I tell them, when you start, maybe start by saying, I'm about to ask you some questions that seem strange. I'm doing this for a class. And as long as you start there, most of my broadcasters come back and are willing to answer all the questions. The major point then is that really we're trying to make our students more culturally competent. Make our students more globally aware, because that's what they're going to have to be when they leave the classroom, when they go out into the global economy to get a job. And so I've given you some examples. These by no means are all of the examples. I'm happy to talk about more with you, but that is the extent of what I have for you.